Good evening, and it is indeed a dark and stormy night. Tonight we're going to be talking about literature for long, dark nights. And I'd love to know, what are the books that you turn to on long, dark November nights? Are you the kind of reader that wants to read a big, fat, juicy novel? Maybe one that's set in an old country house with creaking floorboards and crackling fires? Or would you rather read a twisty thriller, perhaps set in some Nordic, cold, taciturn country? Or are you more the kind of person that wants to read a rollicking Jilly Cooper type novel? I'm going to be talking about a few different kinds of books tonight, though I must admit I have been slightly drawn myself towards the big country house novels, which I think it's just maybe it's due to my upbringing, or maybe it's due to all the books I read as a child myself, such as Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, that had me imagining that I would one day live in a house like Mandalay. Sadly, I don't. However, I still fantasize on the long, dark November nights about being in a big old country mansion by a crackling fire. And that's why I'm surrounded tonight by candles for lack of that fire. And also, it's because we're actually having a power cut. Luckily, we've still got Wi Fi, and I do hope it's going to hold because it's been absolutely bucketing down on my roof. I don't know about you. I'm just sorting out my candle because it's kind of falling off its stick at this moment. But I'd love to know where you are. Is it bucketing down? Can you hear the rain pelting down on the rooftop? I have been for the last few hours. And that did lead me to get out this book, which I hadn't picked up for a good couple of years, which is the classic, perfect book to read on a dark and stormy night. It's by Janet and Alan Olberg, the married couple who produced many amazing, I think they produced nearly 100 books together. Um, One writing, one drawing. And this is a fantastic story. They are absolutely beautifully illustrated, and they have a really gorgeous sense of humour and fun and humanity. And they're just really fabulously told, not just for kids like all the best stories. I'm just going to read you a tiny bit from the beginning so that you can remember what it's like to read tales on a dark and stormy night when you were a child, or perhaps you might have read stories like this to your children if you have children. It was a dark and stormy night. The rain came down in torrents. There were brigands on the mountains and wolves, and the chief of the brigands said to Antonio, "I'm bored. Tell us a story." Antonio was a small, brave boy, 8 years old, who'd been kidnapped by the brigands and carried off to their secret cave. He scratched his curly head, puffed out his cheeks, and said, "I don't know any stories." "Make one up," growled the chief. "Righto," Antonio said, and he paused for a moment and began his story. "It was a dark and stormy night," said Antonio. It was all he could think of. "The rain came down in torrents. There were brigands on the mountains and wolves, and the chief of the brigands said—" At this point, the real chief held up his hands. "Get rid of the rain." "I beg your pardon?" Antonio looked puzzled. "No rain," said the chief. "I'm sick of it." "Yeah," said the brigands. Let's have a dry story." And so it goes on. This would be an excellent book to pick up on a dark and stormy night, to read it to yourself or share it with anyone handy. And it does make an important point that stories are what gets us through the dark and stormy nights. We need stories one way or another. whether we're going to tell them to each other sitting around the fire, whether we're going to read them to ourselves, whether we're going to read them to each other. And I would very much urge people to read to each other if you feel that way inclined. And otherwise, pick up one of the books that I'm going to be talking about this evening. But also, tell me your faves if you have particular books that you turn to in these November nights, or particular types of books, because I'd love to know. Everyone's different, but I do think there's definitely maybe a certain desire to read a lovely, good, long yarn on these long, dark nights with potentially no electricity. I'm wondering if it's all a bit too dark without a candle. Do tell me if you can actually see me, and if you can't, give me a wave and say something about getting a candle closer. So I'm going to start off, apart from the classic Allberg fabulous children's book, another one which some might mistake for a children's book is Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising collection, which are some of the best stories that you've ever read. Damien, I think you might have been reading this quite recently, because I think you were talking about it not long ago and saying how much you loved it. These are books that I discovered myself quite late. They were written in 1973, but I only read them when it was time for me to write about children's books, when I was writing The Story Cure with my co-writer, Susan Alderkin. And that's when I discovered these amazing books by Susan Cooper. And I had the joy of listening to them while driving down to Cornwall, which is probably, I feel, the perfect moment to discover, or the perfect situation to discover such a writer, because the first book, which is called Oversea Under Stone, is all set in Cornwall, and it's, well, in fact, they are all set in Cornwall. Trudy's saying, hi Trudy, that she's currently reading Stephen King's Bag of Bones. That sounds like a fantastic and excellent choice for this time of year. I haven't actually read that, and I immediately must. I'm going to read you an introduction to The Dark is Rising by Robert Macfarlane, because I think he describes how brilliant these books are much better than I can. And I am a big fan of Robert Macfarlane too. So we can have the joy of Macfarlane sharing his joy in these amazing books by Susan Cooper, which are several, and they're all absolutely brilliant. So this is Robert Macfarlane talking about his experience of reading these books. It is midwinter eve in an English village, 4 days short of Christmas and 1 day short of the 11th birthday of a boy named Will Stanton. Far to the north, a snowstorm is brewing, and things are not as they normally are in the landscape around. Animals are restless, and rooks clatter from treetops to swirl above the fields. Local people have seen these signs before. They know what is coming. This night will be bad, an old farmer tells Will, and tomorrow will be beyond imagining. That's exactly the kind of beginning of a book that I love. Reading the opening pages of The Dark is Rising again, reading them for what must be at least the 20th time in my life, I feel a lurch in the stomach pit and a prickle of nerves down the right side of my neck. Why does fear touch us in those places on the body? How does Cooper's prose and plot possess such power to disturb? I experience a similar fright when I return to Alan Garner's The Owl Service, or to certain moments in John Masefield's The Box of Delights, itself a book that Susan Cooper read as a child. These are all stories not of horror but of dread, what Will calls a shadowy awareness of evil, and they show more than they tell. I can clearly remember the first time I read The Dark is Rising. It was the hot summer of 1989, the summer I turned 13, the summer the Berlin Wall was torn down, and the summer I began to believe that the world might just escape being destroyed by nuclear war before I had a chance to grow up. Now, hang on, Robert Macfarlane is reading these books in the summer, which is all wrong. He should definitely be reading them in the winter for the first time. But maybe, I hope, he has read them in the dark, cold, wintry nights since that summer moment when it obviously still had an incredibly profound effect on him, even though it was far too hot to be reading such amazing books. But it just goes to show that if you read the right book at the right time in your life, it affects you incredibly deeply. And what's going on outside around you doesn't matter, because great literature has the power to transport so fabulously. I read all 5 of the novels in the sequence, one after the other, gulping them down in big, greedy swallows like cold water after a long walk. I truly did read parts of them under my blankets by the light of a torch, a black mini mag light. I was very proud of it. Their titles glowed in my mind: Oversea, Under Stone, The Dark is Rising, Green Witch, The Grey King, Silver on the Tree, and set my spine tingling for reasons I couldn't explain then and still can't explain now. The landscapes in which their stories unfolded, Cornish coves and headlands, Welsh mountains, the copses, fields and paths of southern England, were at once utterly familiar to me and profoundly alien. Their characters, tall, merry man, capable of such calmness and such wrath, wise Will Stanton, Bran, the Pendragon, horned Herne, entered my imagination and have simply never left. And their covers, oh, how those covers haunted me. So I don't want to go on exclusively about the covers. This is a slightly more modern cover than the ones that he's talking about. And Damien saying dread is sometimes so much more powerful than horror. I so agree. I'm actually so much more of a reader of books full of dread than actual horror, because not since I was a teen have I been a massive fan of horror, I must admit. I occasionally still read it, but I would rather read a book with some spine chilling tingles of dread rather than actual gore that's spelled out. Soon I came to learn by heart, as I suspect you will also learn by heart, the chant that echoes through this book. Once heard, it is not easily forgotten. When the dark comes rising, 6 shall turn it back, 3 from the circle, 3 from the track. This is a spell song against harm, and it is sung, chanted, to keep evil at bay. Even now, when I'm out walking on my own, I sometimes find it looping in my head, such that my feet start to keep pace with its rhythms: wood, bronze, iron, water, fire, stone. 5 will return, and 1 go alone. I taught it to my 2 older children one autumn day, nearly 10 years ago, as we followed an old path through wet woods hung with yellow leaves. And then, a few years after that, I named my youngest son Will because, well, you'll know why when you've read the book. So anyone that has not had the utter joy of reading The Dark is Rising and, frankly, Oversea Under Stone, which was the first one that she wrote that one in 1963, and this was written 10 years later, and she then carried on with the other 3 because they were so hugely successful. You've got such a big treat in store. And I just want to read you one last little bit about this quintuplet of books before I move on, because I just love the way Robert Macfarlane writes about the experience of reading them so brilliantly. Among the many effects of The Dark is Rising was to waken in me a lifelong fascination for old paths and tracks and the names by which they go upon maps and in memory. For 5 years in my 30s, I followed on foot such old ways wherever I found them: coffin routes, pilgrim paths, ridings, stumbles, and snickets, in England, Scotland, and abroad, for hundreds of miles. Cooper was often in my mind, as I walked, and occasionally things occurred that were inexplicable by the usual means. A pair of vast glowing eyes seen in the darkness that could belong to no English creature, screams from the treetops while sleeping the night on Chanctonbury Ring in the South Downs. Were these projections of my own longings and fears at the time, or ghosts of Cooper's prose, or something else entirely? Impossible now to say. Just one last little bit. People have been telling stories to each other around fires of one kind or another for tens of thousands of years. Susan learned the power of storytelling in the air raid shelter as bombs fell around her. I read her books by torchlight, and they helped me cope with the panic I felt almost every day at the possibility of nuclear conflict. Now, new fears, climate breakdown, civil wars, mass extinction, menace the minds of children. The dark is always rising, and the work of the greatest stories is to hold it back. That's why we need stories, and that's why this is such a fantastic collection of stories, because they totally transport you into a different world, and they make you think about good and evil, powerful forces. Obviously our heroes are working as a force for good, and if you haven't read them, discover them now. So I now want to move on. I've got a mixture of old and new novels tonight, but I'm going fairly chronologically, kind of. But I next must mention the fabulous and brilliant I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, which, again, if any of you out there haven't read it, seize this moment to read it this November, because I know that lots of people that come to these salons are writers and very literary people who love to read a lot and quite likely might be writing their own novels. And this book is very much a book about writing. It's a coming of age novel about a girl who is learning to capture life with her pen, hence I Capture the Castle. And it's an absolute joy of a read. It was written by Dodie Smith when she was living in America, and she was absolutely desperately missing England and wishing that she could go back. She only went there for a brief period and ended up staying in America for 15 years. And all the time that she was there, she was feeling incredibly nostalgic about England, and you can really feel that in this book because it does have an absolutely gorgeous appreciation of the British countryside and also of the British people, the hilarity of the classes, the way that the different classes work. And she's just got an absolutely brilliant observational eye. I'm just going to read you a tiny bit about the writing of the novel by Valerie Grove, who wrote about it. Oh dear, there goes the candle. That is not ideal, falling on the floor. One moment while I retrieve the candle, which I do need in order to read by. Here we go. It was her first novel, written in a fever of nostalgia for England. In 1945, Dodie was living in California. She and her pacifist husband Alec and their Dalmatian Pongo and their Rolls Royce had left their idyllic cottage at Finchingfield in Essex just before the outbreak of war. It was the pinnacle of her fame as a playwright, when Dear Octopus, the most enduring of her 6 successful 1930s plays, was still being performed to packed houses in the West End. Lots of people forget that Dodie Smith, who wrote 101 Dalmatians, was also a playwright, and that she wrote several other grown-up books and plays. In America, she made a handsome living from Hollywood, but she found California a meaningless place and felt screenwriting to be a prostitution of her skills. Only one new play, Lovers and Friends, made it to Broadway in 1942. She lived in a perpetual state of regret about having left London, where she longed to be. her ear pressed to the wireless reports, avid for letters from friends with their accounts of air raids, furious at having denied herself the good copy that Britain at war might have supplied her for her plays if only she had stayed. So she sat down at the desk facing the window in Anatoly Litvak's splendid house at Malibu with a magnificent view over the Pacific Ocean. Don't think we can actually feel that sorry for her, really. And the wide blue sky, and she began to write I Capture the Castle. It was the only one of her novels. She was later to write 5 more, including, of course, The 101 Dalmatians, which was written with real inspiration and packed with convincing characters, which have kept it in print and close to readers' hearts for more than 5 decades. So that's the intro by Valerie Grove. And now I just want to read you a little bit about the actual castle, which is a great insight into the loveliness of the way she writes and the kind of innocence and naivety of Cassandra, who is the heroine of the story for people that don't know it. How strange memory is. When I close my eyes, I see 3 different castles, one in the sunset light of that first evening, one all fresh and clean as in our early days here, one as it is now. The last picture is very sad because all our good furniture has gone. The dining room hasn't so much as a carpet. Not that we have missed that room much. It was the first one we saw that night we explored the house and was always too far from the kitchen. The drawing room has a few chairs still, and thank goodness no one will ever buy the piano because it's so big and old. But the pretty chintz curtains are faded and everything has a neglected look. When the spring comes, we must really try to freshen up our home a little. At least we can still have beech leaves. We've been poor for 5 years now. After Mother died, I fear we lived on the capital of the money she left. Not that I ever worried about such things at the time, because I always felt sure Father would make money again, sooner or later. Mother brought us up to believe he was a genius and that geniuses mustn't be hurried. What is the matter with him, and what does he do all the time? I wrote yesterday, he does nothing but read detective novels, and that was just a silly generalisation, because Miss Marcy can seldom let him have more than 2 a week, although he will read the same ones again and again after a certain lapse of time, which seems to be amazing. Of course, he reads other books too. All our valuable ones have been sold, but there are a good many of the others left, including an old incomplete Encyclopedia Britannica, and so on. So that's the heroine talking about their castle that they live in. And they have been living in this crumbling castle for several years. She's living with her sister and her father, who is a writer with writer's block. He once wrote a hugely successful novel, which gave him fame and fortune. But ever since then, he's had terrible writer's block. And our heroine has to find a way of getting him to write again in order to get the family fortunes back. And that's really what the book's about. And we do have this book, I Capture the Castle, in our book, the novel Cure, mine and Susan Elderkin's, as a cure for writer's block. And if you read it, you'll understand what that cure is, but I can't tell you because it would give away the plot. So read it and find out. Meanwhile, I'm now going to move on to another fantastic country house book. So the reason that I was mentioning this one is because it's the perfect and, in a way, the epitome of the country house novel, I think, as it is set in a crumbling castle. This one is another fantastic country house novel, The Whalebone Theatre by Joanna Quinn. And it's her debut novel, and it's had great success. It's been taken up by book clubs all over the land, and generally everyone's reading it, and it is a really excellent read. So the Whalebone Theatre, I hear you ask, if you don't know about it. Look at the picture on it, you can see that there is a whalebone. So it's not a metaphor, it really is a theatre made from the carcass of a whale. Um, it's a sweeping historical epic, and it's all about a family who live in a wonderful, huge country estate, which is in Dorset on the coast. And the heroine, the main heroine, is called Christabel Seagrave, whose passion for amateur dramatics ropes in family and servants alike at the Chilcombe estate. And here we have the country set in all their jazz age glory, with cocktails at breakfast, costumes at tea time, and a general sense that the world is a peach, ripe for the plucking. But unfortunately, war is coming, and their entire lives are going to change because of the war. And Christabel, who is the one that is the nascent theatre director, actually becomes a spy and goes off to France and has to parachute out of the sky and so on. But I won't tell you the plot, exciting though it is. And I just wanted to read you a little bit, if I can find it quickly. March 28 is what I've got down. Um, is it going to come to hand? I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it with ease. I will talk about it while I look through the book. Oh yeah, so the bit I wanted to read you, if I can find it, it's all about the moment when they first find the whale. And it is actually a particularly lovely piece of writing, because the girl, Christabel, is standing on top of the whale's carcass, and she actually stabs her flag into the whale carcass in order to claim it as hers, or to claim it for their whole family, which she does successfully. But then there's all sorts of madness when the whale gets taken away from them again. I'm not going to be able to find you the bit to read. You're going to have to read it yourselves, but it is, believe me, a really excellent read. And the whalebone theatre is at the heart of the novel, even though there's a huge amount of action that takes place in other countries too, because all of the family get involved in the war and go off around Europe in various different ways. And there are three children who all have very different experiences of the war. And it's a fascinating and great story, which I would very much recommend. And throughout the book, as well as the metaphor and reality of the whalebone theatre, there's also the crumbling, massive country estate. And there are all sorts of shenanigans that go on in that estate. There are breakfast cocktail parties, drunken parents who are pretty useless at being parents, and all sorts of fabulous parties and annoyed servants having to deal with everything that the rather spoiled children can't deal with. Um, anyway, all in all, an excellent read. It's also been adapted for TV with Olivia Colman, and I think, oh no, sorry, that was moving ahead onto the next book. I do apologise. So moving on to the next book. The next book that I wanted to talk to you about is The 13th Tale by Curtis Settenfield. I wonder if any of you out there tonight have read it. That's the one that has been adapted into a TV adaptation. I haven't seen it, but it stars Olivia Colman. Apparently it's very good. And if you have seen it, it does give away the whole story. But if you haven't seen it, I would very much recommend reading the novel, which is a great read. And in fact, I have met people that saw the TV programme first, then read the book and still loved it. So it's a debut novel again, as is The Whalebone Theatre. And it centres around the life of fictional novelist Vida Winter, who has always remained elusive until she is struck down by terminal illness. She enlists the help of amateur biographer Margaret Lee by summoning her to write her biography and learn all her secrets. But what's great about this book is it's obviously a book that's brilliant for book lovers because it's all about the joy of books, and it's very much about the joy of telling stories and the way that stories keep you alive. Because even as Vida Winter, the novelist, is dying, she keeps getting new leases of life whenever she either tells a story or hears a story, because she's so much addicted to stories. Stories are her lifeblood. And there's all sorts of excellent quotes from it that I will read you in a minute about the joy of writing. But also, Vida Winter, being a novelist, lies constantly, and she tells her story in a very unreliable fashion. And that's also what makes it really interesting, because we have to slowly piece together what is truth and what is reality as we read the book. So one reason that I thought it's a great read for the long, dark November nights is because it's got that country house vibe. And this has not only one but two great country houses in it. One of them is the house where Vida Winter herself lives, and it's a really enormous mansion where the minute you walk in, all sound disappears. Everything is soft. All the furnishings are velvet and soft and deep carpets, and you can not hear yourself breathe because breath disappears into the velvet in a matter of moments, and it's all very hushed and a bit weird. Also outside there are there's the topiary, which turns out to be a homage to someone from Vida Winter's past, which I cannot reveal to you. But there's the classic topiary motif. It makes us think of The Shining, and the topiary doesn't behave in a mysterious way like in The Shining, but there are lots of ghosts. There's also twins who are at the centre of the story, not only twins who are completely identical and absolutely wedded to each other in terms of the way that they live their lives, but also there are twins who lost each other at birth without giving too much away. So twins are a very important motif, and I do love a good twin tale, I have to say. Um, anyway, there are also ghosts. So there are ghosts that seem to patter around both houses. So the house where this dying author lives and where our heroine Margaret has gone to write her biography, that's full of occasional ghosts pattering around. But also there's another house, which is the house where she grew up, where Vida Winter grew up. And that is actually a deserted ruin now, also full of ruined topiary. And that house is also full of ghosts. And I can't tell you who the ghosts are, of course. So I'm going to read you a couple of quotes by Curtis Settenfield from this book, which will give you an idea of how excellent it is about the joy and the power of stories. There's something about words. In expert hands, manipulated deftly, they take you prisoner, wind themselves around your limbs like spider silk. And when you are so, hang on, when you are so enthralled you cannot move, they pierce your skin, enter your blood, numb your thoughts. Inside you, they work their magic. Or there's a couple more quotes, because she does just write so brilliantly about the way stories work. And Trudy's just commenting, twins and ghosts in my fearful symmetry, Audrey Neffenegger. Yes, now that's a book that I haven't read yet, and I'm absolutely dying to read that. I love Audrey Neffenegger, or the other books I've read of hers, and that's one that I'm totally psyched to read, and I don't know why I haven't got around to it yet. So thank you for reminding me. I might actually have to instantly order that after we finish tonight. That's a great recommendation, particularly another one for this time of year. Here's another quote from Curtis Settenfield, from the 13th Tale. All morning I struggled with the sensation of stray wisps of one world seeping through the cracks of another. Do you know the feeling when you start reading a new book before the membrane of the last one has had time to close behind you? You leave the previous book with ideas and themes, characters even, caught in the fibres of your clothes, and when you open the new book, they are still with you. Don't you just love that? Characters caught in the fibres of your clothes. And when you open the new book, those characters are still with you in the fibres of your clothes. And by the way, just as an aside, I would say for people who know that situation, who know about how one book lingers on with you into the next book, if you can, take a break in between books, even if it's very brief, and in that break, pick up at your reading notebook. And in your reading notebook, devote one page to the book that you've just read and write a few thoughts about that book. Doesn't have to be long, as you can see. You don't always even have to write a full page. Make sure you write down title of the book, author, place where you read it, because that would jog memories about what was happening in your life at the time, date you finished the book, and then a few thoughts about the book. Did you love it? Did you hate it? And that means you'll have that little moment of reflection before you move on to the next book. And hopefully then you won't have that possible confusion as the new book starts to invade your brain and your being. So I'm going to move on to the next book because I've still got a few that I want to mention before we come to an end. And now, okay, so here we go. City of Thieves by David Benioff. So this was a recommendation, thanks so much, from Matt. And it's one that I haven't actually read myself yet, but it sounds brilliant. And it's one that I would really like to read. And I think it's been attracting lots of attention. Everyone's reading it. We've all got to read it. City of Thieves by David Benioff. Benioff's new novel reveals why there are so many Russians, not oligarchs or prostitutes, but soldiers and old babushkas in this nice American boy's fiction. So this is from an article from the New Yorker talking about City of Thieves. City of Thieves follows a character named Lev Benioff, the son of a revered Soviet Jewish poet who was disappeared in the Stalinist purges, as Lev and an accomplice carry out an impossible assignment during the Nazi blockade of Leningrad. Now, it's the impossible assignment which makes it such a great story. Before Lev begins to tell his story, however, a young Los Angeles screenwriter named David visits his grandfather in Florida, pleading for his memories of the siege. But this is no postmodern coquetry. In fact, the novel tells a refreshingly traditional tale driven by an often ingenious plot. So, I'm not sure if it actually tells us here about the plot, but basically, it's all about how the two heroes have to find 6 eggs in during the siege of Leningrad, and if they can find these 6 eggs, which are needed for a cake for Colonel Gretchko's daughter who's getting married, then they will not be executed. So everything hangs on them finding these eggs, and finding eggs apparently at this time would be easier to find snow in Saudi Arabia. But if Lev and Collier, the heroines, can locate a dozen, they'll get back their ration cards and keep their lives. So that is a really fascinating premise for a story, and it sounds brilliant. And that was recommended by Matt as his suggestion for what to read on a long, dark November night. And thanks so much for that, which sounds really excellent. Now then, I wonder if any of you have other great suggestions. Fearful Symmetry, that's a brilliant one. Very excited about that. Do tell me, anyone else, if you've got great recommendations for us to read. The Spirit Engineer by A.J. West is another fantastic historical novel. We are having a lot of historical novels, I must say, but I think they just really suit the cold, dark, ghostly nights. And talking of ghosts, we got some ghost ones too. Um, so, The Spirit Engineer is a chilling debut teeming with spirits, seances, and scandal. It's the must read novel or must listen to novel for the spooky season. Whenever I do these sessions, I always have a moment of terror when I hear my door behind me being opened by a cat, because the cats always want to try and come in and they always give me the biggest fright. I always have these very ghostly situations when I'm leading up to the salons for some reason. It actually happened to me earlier tonight as well, because there was a candle reflecting in the window and it really looked as if it was outside the window, as if someone was holding a candle outside the window, and it gave me the biggest chill down my spine, just like many of these books do. So, Spirit Engineer is set in Belfast, 1914. 2 years after the sinking of the Titanic, high society has become obsessed with spiritualism, attending seances in the hope that they might reach their departed loved ones. William Jackson Crawford is a man of science and a skeptic, but one night, with everyone sitting around the circle, voices come to him, seemingly from beyond the veil, placing doubt in his heart and a seed of obsession in his mind. Could the spirits truly be communicating with him, or is this one of Kathleen's parlour tricks gone too far? Based on the true story of Professor William Jackson Crawford and famed medium Kathleen Gallagher, and with a cast of characters including Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Harry Houdini, the Spirit Engineer conjures a haunted, twisted tale of power, paranoia, and one ultimate, inescapable truth. It's been described as haunting, witty, and deeply moving. Also, so clever it makes your head spin. So, frankly, how can anyone resist such a book? And actually, one of the reviewers on Amazon also said that he would describe it as the perfect read for this time of year, and he actually deliberately saved it up to read in the spooky season, because October, November, that's when everything all gets pretty darn spooky with these long, dark nights. And I wonder if you are people that enjoy reading ghost stories on the long, dark nights, or does it actually get you too nervous to actually be able to sleep? So, one that's a bit of a different vibe, which just to take us in a slightly different direction, is Housekeeping by Marian Robinson, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning American novelist, famed for this book and also Gilead and the various others, which were all set in the same town and practically in the same house. So, Housekeeping, it's actually written 40 years ago, is the story of two sisters, Ruth, the narrator, and her younger sister, Lucille, as they grow up in a wild and desolate part of America's Northwest. The style makes it seem that it could have been written a century ago rather than in 1981. But it is a very beautiful, flowing, and poetic novel, which has a very ephemeral feel. And the prose is frankly luminous. It is an absolutely beautifully written book. And I think with all of Marilyn Robinson's books, one feels in a way that not a huge amount happens, but nonetheless, they're just so beautifully written that you do want to sit there absorbing every word. So, the two sisters are cared for by a succession of female relatives until Sylvie, their dead mother's unworldly sister, moves in to look after them. Sylvie lives a dreamlike existence, wandering the shore of the lake where they live, or sitting alone in the darkened kitchen, her behaviour so unconventional that she seems at times almost deranged. The girls are self-reliant and close, and Sylvie drifts along, seemingly unaware or unwilling to do anything about their truancy from school. And this actually has a lot in common with the book I was just talking about, The 13th Tale, because in that book there's also sisters who are incredibly close to each other, who've been neglected by their parents and by the people that should have been looking after them, and they don't go to school either. So it does seem to be a bit of a theme of the evening for some reason. Maybe that's that twin thing coming back to us. So there are moments when you fear for their safety. Eventually, Lucille rebels against their strangely claustrophobic existence, but Ruth stays with Sylvie as the novel builds to an unexpected denouement. Always the lake and the railway line are a worryingly threatening presence in the background. So that's Housekeeping by Marilyn Robinson, which is a very different kind of book, still quite chilling in a way, but also set in a very tangible house that you can completely believe in as a character in itself. Another one whose title doesn't leave anything to the imagination is This House is Haunted by John Boyne, written in 2013. So John Boyne, I'm sure many of you will have read some of his books. He is very famous for writing The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. Sorry, I think we might have lost connection there for a minute. I think the rain's coming back and it might all get a bit ropey once more. And he's written many other brilliant books as well. The Heart's Invisible Furies, which is one of my favourite books to recommend in the last few years, and A Ladder to the Sky. He's also won many literary prizes and has been published in over 50 languages. So This House is Haunted is quite an atypical book for him because he doesn't normally write about ghosts, or maybe going back so far in history. It's set in 1867 on a dark and chilling night, just like tonight. Eliza Kane arrives in Norfolk to take up her position as governess at Gordlin Hall. See, it's another governess book. We do love a governess book. The Turn of the Screw comes to mind, which would be another great read for this time of year. As she makes her way across the station platform, a pair of invisible hands push her from behind into the path of an approaching train. She's only saved by the vigilance of a passing doctor. It's the start of a journey into a world of abandoned children, unexplained occurrences, and terrifying experiences, which Eliza will have to overcome if she is to survive the secrets that lie within Gordlin's walls. So that's could there be a more enticing description of a novel? I ask you. Ooh, and now I'm suddenly aware that time is running out, and I must talk to you about a different kind of book, which I also think is a fantastic one for reading on these long, dark November nights. The Coming Darkness by Greg Moss, which is a really excellent dystopian read set in 2037, which builds up an atmosphere of dread. Like Damien was mentioning earlier, we very much feel spine-tingling dread, probably for the first 2/3 of the book, before everything gets incredibly exciting. And it's a great read, The Coming Darkness. So set in Paris, 2037, where there is poverty, exclusion, environmental degradation, and disease. Alex Lamarck is the hero of the book. He is from the French External Security Service, hunting for eco-terrorists. Experience has taught him to trust no one, not even his mentor, Professor Fayad, or his secret lover, Mariam. He follows the trail of a string of brutal child murders, a chaotic coup in North Africa, and the extraction of its leader while under fire, all against the stressful backdrop of his mother fighting a new virus that threatens her life. So There's many brilliant references in the book to the horrors of um, unexpected viruses, pandemics, people being put into isolation the minute they show any worrying symptoms. And our hero, Alex's mother, is put into isolation. And there's a very chilling moment when non-human care is recommended for her because, of course, humans can't go into her room without risk of infection. It's all deeply sinister and horribly dystopian, and um, actually really feels worryingly possible. I think Greg Moss has really captured all the worries that we are feeling right now about the environment, our world, the possibility of more pandemics, and about the political madness going on in the world. And he's really played on those fears, but it is an excellent read, which I think you would really enjoy. And there's also quite a lot of humour in it too. It's his debut novel, I do believe, and he has been described as, Greg Moss writes, like John le Carre's hip grandson, and Lee Child said that. So that's pretty high praise. Anthony Horowitz says it's big, meaty, and ambitious thriller. And I can confirm that it's a really excellent read. So, one more that I would like to mention before we sadly come to an end for the evening is another lovely ghost story, Haunt Me by Liz Kessler, which is a young adult book. Um, and my daughter read it and loved it. Liz Kessler has written lots of absolutely fantastic novels, including When the World Was Ours, which is a really brilliant book set in Nazi Germany. And this one I wanted to mention because it's a really good ghost story, which is really chilling, but it's also a love story. And it is somehow, I feel, a perfect read for this time of year and this moment. Um, it's about how love can overcome the ultimate divide. In a nutshell, Joe wakes up from a deep sleep to see his family leave in a removals van. Where they've gone, he has no idea. Erin moves house and instantly feels at home in her new room, even if it appears she isn't the only one living in it. Bit by bit, Erin and Joe discover they've somehow found a way across the ultimate divide of life and death. Bound by their backgrounds, a love of poetry, and their growing feelings for each other, they are determined to find a way to be together. Meanwhile, Joe's brother Ollie never cared much for poetry. He was always too busy being the king of the school. But that all changed when Joe died. I won't go on because I don't want to give too much away. But it is a really fantastic read, and I would thoroughly and totally recommend it to any young adults out there. And also, I'd just love to mention again When the World Was Ours, which is a great read for people of any age. So I just want to read you a little bit that will give you a hint of what it's like. This is quite near the beginning when Joe has woken up from a deep sleep, wondering what's going on. And this is his brother Ollie talking to him. I guess this is goodbye. Ollie cuts across me. His words are like a punch in my gut. They push me backwards. I would fall back on my bed if it was still here. Instead, I stand in the middle of my room, my arms limp by my side, my head swimming with cloudy confusion. Ollie, what are you on about? Why would you be saying? I can't believe it, he says. His voice is like metal. Any of it. Can't believe what I did. What you did. Can't believe I'm never gonna see you again. My blood is ice. Ollie, I take a step towards him. Ollie, mate, why are you never gonna see? We had a lot of laughs in this room, though, didn't we? Before he stops, his face hardens. I've never seen him look at me like this, like I don't even exist. Yeah, sure, of course we did, I reply. Truth is, I can't remember any of them right now. Aside from snapshot moments that leave as quickly as they arrive, I can't really remember much at all. But I want to agree with him. I want to him to meet my eyes. I want to keep him here with me. Loads of laughs, I agree. What do you? Ollie's face has a closed door. I just can't believe. I just can't believe there won't be any more, he whispers. I mean, I know we're not going far. We'll still be in the same town, but I'll never come back to this house again. I just can't. None of us can. He's talking right through me again. It's as if he's completely ignoring me. No, it's stronger than that. It's as if I'm not there. Highly, highly chilling. Haven't got time to read more, but it's a great, excellent read. Get it for your teenagers or read it yourself. It's a really good ghost story and love story. All of these books can be found on our Damien Bar Literary Salon page on bookshop.org, and you can actually buy them through that page for a slightly cheaper price than you might buy them on other platforms. And it also supports independent bookshops when you buy them from there. So please do go and check out that page. If you look for Damien Barr's Literary Salon on the bookshop.org website, then you'll find it. And also, you can still buy online tickets for Damien's event on Monday night, which is at 7 p.m. in the British Library, where Damien will be talking to Kate Moss, Lucy Foley, and James Pritchard about a new book called Marple 12 New Stories, which is all about Agatha Christie's Miss Marple. 12 new stories, all written by different brilliant modern authors, including the ones I just mentioned, plus many others such as Natalie Haynes. So that's going to be a really great event. I'm going to be there in reality. You can still buy tickets to join online. So go to the Damien Bar Literary Salon website and check them out there. Also, think about buying the gift of bibliotherapy for a loved one this Christmas. So that's through me. If you enjoy the idea of talking about books and thinking about what books you want to read next and you don't know what books to read next, also if you want to talk about what's going on in your life, then I can prescribe the perfect books for you to read at this time in your life. So you can buy a one-to-one bibliotherapy session with me, and you can buy them as gifts, Christmas gifts for your loved ones. If you'd like to do that, then message me or email me. Trudy, yes, you definitely need to read Haunt Me. I think you would actually love it. And one last thing, don't forget also that I now have this very beautiful collection of cards called Fiction Prescriptions, which is described as book recommendations for life's big moments and emotions. This is a brand new box, so I'm not going to open it. Look, it's got a little seal, but inside there are 200 different recommendations of books, and there are little tabs with different emotions, and you can choose the emotions that you're feeling or the life stage that you're at, and then you can find book recommendations to suit that moment. And if you are interested in buying one of these, then they are on sale in all good bookshops, or you can buy them direct from me. And I'm doing a little nice Christmas gift concept where I will write a prescription for your loved one. and wrap up a box of fiction prescriptions and send it to you all for only £25. So think about doing that. Do message me or email me if you would like bibliotherapy of any of that kind, or fiction prescriptions. But thanks so much for joining me this evening. I will maybe see some of you on Monday night at the Miss Marple event. And I'd love to know any other great reads that you're reading at the moment. So I'll also be going live next week on my Ella Beartu Instagram and Facebook Live. So join me then, and do send in messages about any particular ailments or issues that you would like to discuss and that I can attempt to give you a fiction prescription for. Have a great rest of the week and see you soon. Good night.